Today, we're kicking off a series that I think gets right to the heart of it all. We're calling it Portraits of Jesus. We've done the research, we've gone through the sources, and we want to tackle two, pretty simple questions.
Deceptively simple.
Exactly. Who is Jesus, and why is that supposed to be good news?
And to even start answering that, you have to shift your perspective right away.
Mm-hmm.
The sources we have, they give us this really rich way of looking at the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Right.
We have to see them not just as, theological books, but as a very specific type of ancient literature. Understanding the genre they were working in, that's the key.
It unlocks everything. So today's deep dive is all about that context, the literary and historical world of the Gospels. And then we're jumping straight into the first portrait, the Gospel of Mark.
Jesus as the suffering servant.
Yes. We want to understand how this specific, really unique perspective sets up the entire story. This is where we start building the picture.
And what's so fascinating right from the start is the paradox of it all. You have one Jesus, one gospel message,
One story.
but we were given four different books about it.
Mm-hmm.
Four separate perspectives. It's what the early church called God's providence.
Four witnesses, four lenses. The story's the same, but the angle, the emphasis, it's just wildly different.
Matthew's writing to Jews, John's writing to a totally different crowd.
And that's exactly what we're going to be digging into. But okay, first things first, let's build that foundation.
First,
We have
what
to
do
start
you
with the name of these books, Gospel. So for this first section, let's define what that even means in its original context. The Greek term.
The word is evangelion. And what you really have to grasp is that this word is doing two things at once, and that's intentional.
Okay.
On one level, evangelion is the message itself. It's the content. The good news about Jesus Christ and his saving work. That's the theology.
The announced.
The announcement, exactly. But then there's this other level, the literary one we tend to forget. Evangelion also came to mean a specific kind of book, a literary genre.
Ah, so it's not just what it says, but what it is.
Precisely. It was, in effect, a new form of ancient biography that was basically invented to tell this one specific story.
So for someone in the first century, if they picked this up, it would feel familiar.
It would. It would immediately ring some bells. The ancient world was, flooded with Greco-Roman biographies, a life of an emperor, a life of a philosopher.
So the basic structure would be recognizable.
Absolutely. A story that tells you about the important sayings and the major deeds of a central figure. It would feel sort of like that.
That makes a lot of sense. They were using a literary language their audience already understood. A bio, a life story.
But, and this is the crucial point, while the container was familiar, the thing inside the container was revolutionary.
So how were they different? What makes the Gospels stand out from, say, a biography of Alexander the Great?
The similarity pretty much stops at the basic structure. The biggest difference is their completely singular theological focus on Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay.
I mean, a Roman biography might talk about a general's military tactics, his political rivals, his family life, all sorts of things. But the Gospels, they exist for one reason and one reason only.
To make a claim about Jesus.
Yes, to proclaim who he is, that he's the Messiah, the Son of God, and to explain why his life and death are good news for the whole world. Every single story, every chosen detail serves that one theological purpose.
Which means we have to throw our modern ideas of biography out the window when we come to these books.
Completely.
Yeah.
This is probably the biggest hurdle for a modern reader.
Because if you open Mark expecting, a new biography of Lincoln where you get every detail from birth to death in perfect order, you're going to be so confused.
You'll be baffled. You wonder, where's his childhood? What was he doing for those 30 years? The ancient form just had a different set of rules.
Okay, let's break that down because this seems foundational for the whole series. The first big difference you mentioned is scope. Ancient Gospels were more select than comprehensive.
When we think comprehensive, we think exhaustive. Every letter, every diary entry.
All 800 pages of it.
Right. The evangelists weren't trying to be exhaustive. They were curators. They picked and chose the stories and the teachings that best made their theological case about Jesus.
So they're not just chroniclers, they're more like lawyers building an argument.
That's a great way to put it, which also means they weren't always obsessed with a perfect minute-by-minute chronology.
Ah, so they might group things by theme instead.
Exactly. They might put 3 healing stories back to back to make a powerful point about Jesus' authority over sickness, even if those events happened, months apart. The question for them wasn't what happened next. It was, what did this story prove about who Jesus is?
Okay, that makes sense. The second difference then is about objectivity. We expect modern biographers to be neutral, impartial.
And that idea of a detached, neutral observer was, well, it was mostly irrelevant to them, especially when writing about a figure they believed was the Son of God.
So they weren't hiding their bias.
They were broadcasting it. They weren't impartial reporters. They were passionate followers. These are evangelistic documents written to persuade you, the reader.
So we have to just accept that they're not giving us just the facts. They're giving us the facts as they understood them through a lens of faith.
Yes, and that leads right into the third difference, which is how intentional they were. They were shaping a very specific portrait. And you see this most clearly in how they handle the end of the story.
The death.
The death. In a typical Greco-Roman biography, the great man's death it's a sad ending, a tragic postscript.
The end of the story.
For the gospel writers, the death was the story. It was the whole point. They put this enormous, almost disproportionate amount of emphasis on the final week of his life.
You're right. If you look at Mark, something like a full third of the entire book is just about that 1 week in Jerusalem.
It's unbelievable. It tells you everything about their priority. The death wasn't a tragedy that cut short a great career. It was the planned climactic event that achieved our salvation. They weren't just writing history.
They were writing salvation history.
Exactly. The cross and the resurrection, that's what turns a biography into an evangelion, into good news.
It's the difference between a book designed to celebrate a life and a book designed to explain a necessary sacrifice.
Well said. And even though they all have their own unique angle, they all share that basic, non-neutral, salvation-focused framework.
So even with 4 different portraits, there's a core harmony, a shared, non-negotiable skeleton that they all build on.
Absolutely. No matter who they're writing for, they all hit 3 foundational points to prove their case.
What's the first one?
First, they all zoom in on Jesus' ministry of teaching and healing. This wasn't just, being nice to people. It was a demonstration of authority.
Authority over what?
Over everything. Nature, disease, demons, even authority to fulfill and interpret the Jewish law. It was showing that the kingdom of God had finally arrived in person.
Okay, so first is his ministry of power. Second, you need a conflict to drive the plot to its climax.
You do. So they all carefully document the rising opposition from the religious and political leaders, both Jewish and Roman, that ultimately gets him killed.
It explains how Messiah King ends up on a cross.
It establishes the historical context for that shocking turn of events. And then the third point, the one that changes everything.
The resurrection.
The resurrection. It has to be there. Without it, you just have the sad story of another Jewish radical who got executed by Rome. The story ends there.
But all 4 are insistent.
They are unified in their insistence that Jesus is Israel's promised Messiah, the Son of God, who reveals God's kingdom and salvation by defeating death.
That sets the stage perfectly. We have the shared canvas. Now we can look at the unique brushstrokes of each artist. So this shared foundation is there. The Messiah died and rose again. But within that, each writer, influenced by their audience, their own personality, and the Holy Spirit, they paint a really different picture.
They do. And we can start with some generalizations. They're simplifications, of course, but they're really helpful for getting the basic flavor of each gospel.
Okay, let's map them out. First up, Matthew.
Matthew presents Jesus as the King and Messiah. His book is so carefully structured to show how Jesus fulfills Old Testament prophecy. He's constantly quoting it.
And his audience was primarily Jewish Christians, right?
That's a consensus. So he's all about proving Jesus's royal and messianic credentials, connecting him to King David.
Okay. And then Mark, who we're focusing on today.
Mark gives us Jesus as the suffering servant. He's not as interested in the long speeches or the family tree. He wants to show Jesus in motion, constantly working, serving, healing.
Moving toward the cross. The paradox is that the Son of God came to serve and die, not to rule from a throne.
Exactly. Then you have Luke, the careful historian, yes. Luke paints Jesus as the compassionate Son of Man. He really emphasizes that Jesus' mission is for everyone, Gentiles, women, the poor, the outcasts.
Luke is the one who gives us those really human, emotional details.
He does. He shows us the empathy of Jesus. And finally, John.
Who is just different.
John is in a category of his own. He presents Jesus as the divine Son of God. He doesn't start with the birth in Bethlehem. He starts before time itself.
In the beginning was the Word.
A huge cosmic declaration. John is focused on the eternal identity of Jesus, who he is.
Those are great signposts. But I came across another way of looking at it from a commentator, Pamela Rose Williams, that I found really helpful. It's just from the title, like king or servant, to what the writer actually focuses on.
I like that. It moves from the static label to the dynamic action of the author.
Yeah. So Matthew, the king, focuses on what Jesus said.
Right. Matthew is where you find the longest sermons. The Sermon on the Mount, the big parables of the kingdom. He's all about communicating the teaching of Jesus.
Then Mark, our guy today, focuses on what he did.
Pure action. We're going to spend a lot of time on how he creates that feeling of speed.
Then Luke zooms in on how he felt.
Yes, the compassion, the prayers, the emotion, the specific moments of mercy. He gives us the heart of Jesus.
And John, of course, circles back to who he was.
His divine identity, the great I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. It's all about his eternal nature.
It's just a brilliant framework. And it leads us right into Mark. The shortest, the fastest, the one all about action.
The one designed to show us, first and foremost, what Jesus did.
Okay, so let's dive in. Section 3, Mark. The urgency, the action, and this portrait of the suffering servant. We're starting with Mark for a reason. Most scholars believe it was the first of the 4 to be written. What does that mean for its style?
It means it's raw, it's lean,
Yeah.
very direct, very fast-paced. If Matthew's gospel is a carefully organized legal brief,
And Luke's is a detailed historical account.
then Mark's is like an immediate, breathless eyewitness report. There's not a lot of polish.
What do you mean by unpolished?
Well, for one, his Greek is simpler, maybe a bit rougher than Luke's, as a very educated writer. Mark often just strings short sentences together with and.
It creates a kind of tumbling forward feeling.
It does. It lacks the beautiful structure of Matthew or the detailed preface of Luke or the Typhon theology of John. But what it gives you instead is just this raw, unapologetic, full speed ahead story. It's pure velocity.
And he creates that velocity with a specific literary trick, doesn't he? A phrase he uses over and over and over again.
He does. Kaiuthus. It's almost like the drumbeat of the entire gospel.
Which means and immediately or at once. It's a word that just screams speed.
And the sheer number of times he uses it is just. It's staggering. It shows you his intent. We're talking about Mark using this phrase 11 times in the first chapter alone.
11 times in one chapter.
Stop and think about that. If you were reading a novel and the author wrote immediately 11 times in the first few pages, you'd know they were trying to create a specific feeling.
A feeling of overwhelming urgency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It tells you that Mark sees Jesus as a man on a mission with a deadline. Every action is critical and has to happen now. And it tells you that for Mark, Jesus' ministry is defined by doing more than talking. He acts first, and the explanation comes later.
He forces the reader to feel the pace. The kingdom of God isn't strolling in, it's breaking in urgently.
And he's able to do this because he just gets rid of all the preliminaries we see in the other Gospels. He just jumps right into the deep end.
No birth story, no angels, no shepherds, no wise men.
None of it. He starts with a fully grown Jesus walking onto the stage, ready for action. The mission is the priority.
Let's just walk through that first chapter to see the pace. It's dizzying.
It really is. In the first few verses, Jesus is prophesied. John the Baptist shows up. Jesus gets baptized by him.
And then the Spirit immediately drives him into the wilderness to be tempted.
Right. No time to even process the baptism. And as soon as that's over and John is arrested, Jesus is immediately in Galilee preaching the gospel.
And the pace just keeps up. Verses 16 to 20, he's walking by the sea, and bang, he calls his first disciples.
And what do? They immediately drop their nets and follow him. The urgency of the call demands an urgent response. He calls James and John, and they immediately leave their father in the boat.
Then he's in Capernaum, in the synagogue, and immediately there's a man with an unclean spirit.
And Jesus deals with it. Instantly. He demonstrates his power, and the people are immediately amazed.
He doesn't even stop there. He leaves the synagogue, goes to Simon's house, and immediately heals his mother-in-law.
Who then immediately gets up and starts serving them. Every action is instant and effective.
And then that evening, the whole city shows up at the door. He's healing and casting out demons nonstop.
He tries to get away early the next morning to pray, but his disciples hunt him down. They tell him everyone is looking for him, but he's already on the move.
Let's go to the next towns. He just keeps going. The sprint never stops.
It's an incredible piece of writing. Through this sheer volume of activity, Mark is showing us that Jesus is the powerful Son of God who came to serve, to conquer, and ultimately to sacrifice.
And all of that action, all that speed, is rocketing the reader toward one single conclusion.
Yes, the cross.
Yeah.
The pace is designed to hurry you toward the suffering that is the whole point of the service.
So how does Mark explicitly connect all this powerful doing with the identity of the suffering servant?
He gives us two key moments, two signposts in the text. The first is in Mark chapter 8. It's a massive turning point in the book.
Right after Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ.
Exactly. And from that moment on, Jesus begins to teach them plainly that the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected, be killed, and then rise again.
He's setting the expectation. This isn't going to end in a palace in Jerusalem.
No. And Peter can't handle it.
Huh.
He rebukes Jesus for even saying it. He wants the power without the suffering, but Jesus makes it clear they're inseparable.
And the second key verse.
Mark 10.45, this is, maybe the summary verse for the whole gospel. Jesus says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
There it is. All the action, all the healing, all the urgent doing. It was all service.
And it was all leading to the ultimate act of service, giving his life. That's the core message Mark is driving home with this relentless pace. The greatest thing he did was suffer.
It's just a masterpiece of theological efficiency. It starts fast, it runs fast, and it even ends abruptly.
It does. It is the raw, foundational story of action leading to sacrifice.
Okay, let's pivot from the text itself to the man behind it, the author. Mark's gospel has his name on it, but unlike Luke, who gives us a whole prologue about his research methods, Mark says nothing about himself.
He's completely anonymous within his own story, and that just reinforces the whole theme of service and humility as the storyteller gets out of the way.
The focus is 100% on Jesus.
Always. But while we respect that humility, the historical context of who this author was is really important. It helps validate the style of the book.
So what do we know about Mark, the man, from early church history?
Our best information comes from the unanimous testimony of the very early church fathers. The key source is a man named Papias, who was a bishop writing around AD 125.
So very early.
Very early. And Papias tells us that Mark was the interpreter, or maybe the scribe, for the Apostle Peter. He wrote down Peter's sermons and eyewitness accounts of his life with Jesus.
Wait, so this action-packed, fast-paced, immediate gospel is essentially Peter's version of the story.
That's the tradition, and it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who is more of a man of action than Peter? He was the one who was always speaking first, acting first.
You're leaping out of the boat.
Leaping out of the boat. Mark's gospel captures the pace and personality of its primary source, Peter. It gives the book incredible apostolic authority, even though Mark himself wasn't one of the 12.
And Mark actually shows up in other parts of the New Testament, right? He's not just a name on a book.
No, he was a real person, deeply embedded in the early church. We know he was from Jerusalem, and that the early believers actually met in his mother Mary's house.
So he grew up at the absolute center of the movement.
He did. He was also the cousin of Barnabas, which is how he gets connected to the Apostle Paul.
Right, and that led to some drama. The big disagreement.
The big disagreement, yes. In the book of Acts, we read that Paul refused to take Mark on a missionary journey because Mark had deserted them on a previous trip.
He bailed on them.
He bailed on them.
Yeah.
So the man who wrote the gospel of immediate, decisive discipleship had a moment in his own life where he failed at that very thing.
Wow, that makes the gospel even more powerful. The writer championing the suffering servant was himself a man who knew failure and needed grace.
I think it's central to his identity and his theme. Mark himself is a story of redemption. The one who failed is the one Peter trusts to write the foundational story of the Messiah who gives his life as a ransom.
And we know that he was restored, right? That he and Paul made up.
We do. Later in Paul's life, he writes from prison and specifically asks for Mark, saying he is helpful to me in my ministry. And Peter, in one of his letters, calls Mark my son.
So he goes from being a failure in Paul's eyes to being a trusted partner to both Peter and Paul, the two biggest figures in the early church.
It's a remarkable story, and that history helps us pinpoint when and where he wrote the gospel.
The tradition says he was with Peter in Rome.
Correct. Which means he was writing to an audience in the heart of the Roman Empire, an audience that would have understood and valued things like power, efficiency, and decisive action.
And the timing.
Probably in the 50s or early 60s AD. Which is critical because it almost certainly makes his gospel the first one to be written and widely circulated. It was the original template.
So when you put it all together, Mark, writing down Peter's action-packed memories in Rome for a Roman audience in the 50s.
The historical context fits the literary style like a glove. The speed isn't an accident. It's a deliberate choice that reflects the eyewitness, Peter and the audience, Rome.
This has really set the stage. We now see the Gospels as these intentionally crafted, persuasive biographies, and we see Mark's unique contribution as this urgent call to action.
And that intentionality is what you have to take away from this. These books were written to convince you, to highlight the significance of Jesus' life, and most importantly, his death. That purpose is the same, whether it's Mark's action, Matthew's royalty, or Luke's compassion.
Our whole goal with this series is just to appreciate each of those portraits, to know Jesus better so we can follow him better and share that good news more clearly. And Mark gives us the perfect place to start, with the undeniable, immediate action of the suffering servant.
And that intensity, that pace, leaves us with a final question to think about. If Mark focuses so relentlessly on what Jesus did, and if he uses that word immediately 11 times in the very first chapter, what does that urgent, nonstop pace suggest to you about the kind of response the good news requires? The story itself doesn't seem to leave any room for hesitation or for weighing the options. The pace of the narrative seems to demand an equally immediate and decisive choice to follow. Mark doesn't give us time to think. He just shows us what's happening and demands that we act.